Basically, I hit bottom before I OD'd. And a lot of my friends, unfortunately, didn't make it.
It was the 1980s, and Joe Walsh had already carved out his legacy with the Eagles. Stevie Nicks was the ethereal queen of Fleetwood Mac, drifting from stage to stage in velvet capes and platform boots. When these two worlds collided, it was explosive, passionate, and ultimately destructive. Behind the scenes, their relationship was anything but magical. Joe and Stevie's romance burned hot and fast, full of chaos, addiction, and emotional scars. He once meant the world to her, and she chased him like he was the last thing keeping her alive. But what the public didn't see was the darker side, the jealousy, the emotional blackmail, and the endless battles fueled by cocaine and broken egos. Joe Walsh finally opens up today, decades later, and what he reveals is not the fantasy fans might have imagined. He paints a portrait of Stevie not as a fairy tale goddess, but as a complicated, demanding, and troubled woman whose personal demons affected everyone around her. Stevie Nicks had called Joe Walsh the great love of her life, but the reality was darker. Their relationship spiraled into an obsession, haunted by substance abuse and wild emotional swings. Picture this: hotel rooms trashed after screaming fights, long nights of drug-fueled paranoia, and promises shattered before the sunrise. Stevie clung to Joe, desperate to keep him in her orbit, but Joe began to see that their love wasn't healing, it was consuming. He couldn't handle her moods, her manipulation, or her emotional outbursts. She needed saving, but he was barely holding himself together. And when it ended bitterly. There was no peaceful goodbye, no mutual respect. There was silence, resentment, and a trail of destruction. Joe walked away, but Stevie carried that heartbreak like a wound that never healed, and she made sure others felt it too. It wasn't just Joe Walsh who found himself tangled in the seas, chaos of Stevie Nicks's world. Her orbit was magnetic, but it was also volatile, pulling people in with charm and magic, only to burn them with emotional fire. Over the years, she didn't just collect platinum records. She collected grudges, bruised egos, and unresolved feuds. You probably heard of her long-standing tension with Chrissie Hynde of The Pretenders. What began as mutual admiration between two powerful women in rock quickly decayed into sharp stares and colder words. Chrissie, raw and streetwise, didn't buy into Stevie's mystical floating image. She mocked the shawls, the veils, the theatrics, accusing her of hiding behind a manufactured persona. Stevie, wounded and defensive, refused to back down. The air between them turned icy. Festivals became war zones where the dressing rooms had to be placed on opposite sides of the venue.
I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't think I'd ever be funny again. I didn't think I would be able to write music.
Then came the silent war with Belinda Carlisle. In the mid-'80s, when solo careers meant survival, Stevie reportedly accused Belinda of mimicking her ethereal style, trying to steal the thunder of a woman who had built her image from heartbreak and velvet. Industry whispers spoke of screaming matches backstage, of cruel glances during award shows, of interviews laced with thinly veiled insults. Both women smiled for the cameras, but their rivalry was inked into every encounter. But perhaps the most cutting betrayals came not from rivals, but from those closest to Stevie. Her former backup singers, Lori Nicks and Sharon Solani, were more than just voices behind her. They were sisters, soulmates, in harmony. For years they toured the world together, finished each other's sentences, and weathered the storms of fame as one. But the cracks came slowly. Stevie's moods became unpredictable, her demands overwhelming. One day she'd cry in their arms, the next she'd freeze them out completely. Rumors swirled of fights over money, credit, and backstage control. Lori and Sharon eventually grew tired of being both caretakers and shadows. The bond snapped, not in one explosive moment, but through 100 tiny betrayals that added up to silence. The kind of silence that comes not from hate, but heartbreak. Stevie's path through the music world wasn't just lined with roses. It was marked by the bodies of broken friendships, poisoned alliances, and feuds that refused to die. and as the years went by, her smile remained the same on stage. But those who had stood behind her, beside her, or against her had learned to love Stevie Nicks was to survive her. Fans always believed Stevie and Christine McVie were inseparable sisters in Fleetwood Mac. They were the calming female presence in a band constantly on the verge of implosion, two women who, at least on the surface, stood united in a storm of male egos and backstage chaos. But behind the curtain, their relationship had its storms. Think of two queens ruling the same kingdom. Sooner or later, a power struggle was inevitable. In the early 1990s, as the band crumbled under the weight of personal dramas and musical disconnection, Christine privately accused Stevie of being self-centered, unreliable, and impossible to collaborate with. She reportedly said Stevie treated Fleetwood Mac like a backdrop to her solo career, a side project she could pick up and drop as she pleased. The warmth that once existed between them curdled into quiet resentment. Stevie, in return, viewed Christine as distant, passive-aggressive, and lacking in empathy. She felt abandoned, especially during her darkest periods of addiction, when she believed Christine had emotionally checked out. Their once deep friendship turned into a cold, professional tolerance. The tension hit a boiling point during the Time album era in the mid-1990s, a project both women privately loathed. Christine allegedly issued an ultimatum to the band. If Stevie stayed, she would leave. The atmosphere was venomous. Meetings turned into interrogations. Recording sessions felt like walking through a minefield. Years later, when Christine returned to Fleetwood Mac in 2014 after a long hiatus, many hoped it would be a reunion of kindred spirits, but the wounds hadn't healed. Stevie reportedly insisted on full creative control of the tour and its direction. Christine's suggestions were often dismissed or reshaped to fit Stevie's aesthetic. The balance was gone. On stage, the two smiled, laughed, and harmonized like the old days. But off-stage, the silence was telling. They traveled separately, stayed in different hotels, and rarely shared a dressing room. What fans mistook for sisterhood had become a well-rehearsed illusion, kept alive for the sake of nostalgia and ticket sales. Their rift was not loud, not explosive, but it was cold, calculated, and emotionally devastating. The slow deterioration of their friendship was one of Fleetwood Mac's most tragic undercurrents. A silent war between two women who once had each other's backs, now divided by years of pride, pain, and unresolved betrayal. Away from the limelight, Stevie Nicks' personal life was a tangle of emotional burdens, unresolved tensions, and quiet heartbreaks. Born into a strict and image-conscious family, Stevie's rebellion was written in eyeliner, leather boots, and a microphone. But that rebellion came at a cost, especially in her relationship with her father, Jess Nicks. A successful businessman, Jess believed in discipline, structure, and traditional roles. Watching his daughter transform into a mystical rock icon filled him with disapproval. He didn't understand her need for music, for chaos, for freedom, and he never hid it. Their arguments were legendary within the family. Jess often criticized her career choices, her appearance, and her refusal to settle down. When Stevie spiraled into addiction in the 1980s, Jess distanced himself emotionally. He saw it as weakness, not as suffering. The few times he tried to intervene, it came out more like control than compassion. Stevie, hurt and furious, pushed him further away. Her mother, Barbara, was gentler, more patient, but she, too, struggled with her daughter's fame. Barbara wanted a quiet life for Stevie, not the whirlwind of tours, lovers, scandals, and shattered sleep. While she defended her daughter from critics, she could never fully grasp the weight Stevie carried. Stevie, in turn, longed for approval that never came. At holidays, the room would stiffen when she entered. Relatives didn't know what to say to the glamorous star who looked nothing like the little girl they remembered. The isolation deepened when Stevie faced a personal decision that would mark her forever. In the late 1970s, during her on and off relationship with Don Henley, she became pregnant. Afraid that motherhood would end her career, or be impossible in the life she lived, Stevie chose to have an abortion. She never fully recovered emotionally. In interviews decades later, she admitted that the decision haunted her, that she wondered what might have been. To the world, Stevie was a fierce, independent spirit, but privately she grieved the children she never had, the family she was never close to, and the love that always seemed just out of reach. Her fame became both a shield and a prison. She built walls made of stage lights and platinum records, but inside those walls was a woman quietly longing for connection. Her family, despite the glamour surrounding her, never quite knew how to support the real Stevie, the one behind the scarves and makeup. And maybe that's why, even at her peak, she often felt like a girl still trying to prove herself to the people who never quite believed she could make it on her own terms. Of all the fiery chapters in Stevie Nicks' life, none burned hotter than her feud with Lindsey Buckingham. Think of it as Fleetwood Mac's eternal curse. Two soulmates locked in an artistic dance that was both magical and maddening. Their chemistry on stage was undeniable, but behind the curtain, it was years of emotional warfare, betrayal, and raw wounds that never fully closed. Their relationship began in the late 1960s, when they were just two struggling musicians dreaming of fame. They were inseparable, creatively bonded, and climbing the ranks of the rock world together. But the deeper they got into the industry, the more their emotional balance began to unravel. By the time Fleetwood Mac hit their commercial peak in the mid-1970s, Stevie and Lindsey's personal relationship had already crumbled. Yet they still had to perform night after night, standing inches apart on stage, singing songs filled with coded resentment and heartbreak. Each lyric became a weapon. Each harmony masked an argument. Their concerts were less about music and more like psychological theater. Lindsey resented Stevie's rising solo career in the 1980s, and their power struggle intensified. He felt left behind. She accused him of cruelty, of stifling her spirit. He accused her of abandoning the band for her ego. Friends say the backstage tension was unbearable. Recording sessions often ended with slammed doors, walkouts, or tears. Then came the infamous 2018 split. While the official story was vague, the truth was far more bitter. During a performance honoring Fleetwood Mac, Stevie reportedly felt disrespected by Lindsey's behavior. According to sources close to the band, she issued an ultimatum: either he goes or she does. Management C hosed Stevie. Lindsey was out. What followed was a media firestorm. Lawsuits were filed. Allegations were tossed like daggers. Lindsey said he was blindsided. Stevie said she had had enough. The band fractured. Old wounds ripped wide open. And for many fans, the dream of ever seeing the full original lineup together again died in that moment. Their story was a tragedy wrapped in gold records and standing ovations. It was beautiful, ugly, and unforgettable, just like Stevie herself. But even decades later, their bond, fractured and twisted, still lingers in the lyrics they once sang to each other, like a ghost that refuses to fade. Now, as the dust of decades settles, what remains is the truth that no one dared to say aloud until Joe Walsh finally broke the silence. The veil has been lifted. Fans can no longer pretend that Stevie's story was only one of glitter and gold. It was also stained with conflict, driven by ego, and marred by damage she inflicted and received. Her legacy is monumental, yes, but it is also haunted. Haunted by voices silenced, by friends lost, by the wreckage left behind in her storm. Joe's words have opened a door to reality, not fantasy. Stevie left a trail of broken relationships, betrayed friendships, creative implosions, and personal sacrifices. People admired her, feared her, adored her, and at times couldn't stand her. And that complex reality, raw and unfiltered, is what truly defines her. She was not just a muse to rock legends, not just a voice behind iconic ballads. She was a hurricane in velvet, a woman who walked into rooms and demanded attention, and sometimes paid the price for it. Her greatness came at a cost, and that cost was borne by herself and by those who entered her orbit.